I'm Kilgore Rosewater, and on this episode of Worst Movies and Cult Choice, we're going to be taking a look at 2020's supernatural dark horror adventure thriller, Fantasy Island. It was announced in July 2018 that the popular ABC long-running television series from the 80s, Fantasy Island, was being reimagined and developed by Blumhouse Productions and Sony Pictures. The original series was a story about a magical wish-fulfilling island that would attract visitors to live out their wildest dreams. It was an anthology format that had guest stars who were the leads each week, like Maureen McCormick, Michelle Phillips, Roddy McDowall, Sonny Bono, Cesar Romero, and Leslie Nielsen among them. An attempted revival of the series in 1998, led by Malcolm McDowell, the reboot bombed with audiences and was canceled mid-season. This new interpretation was to be a blend of Westworld and Cabin in the Woods. The company that Paranormal Activity built, Blumhouse, still riding high from their Oscar-winning Get Out and having largely left behind the trend of found footage features and traditional demonic possession films, for more high-concept originals that are rewarded for their risks and relevant social commentary. After having just made another horror movie for Blumhouse, Truth or Dare, Jeff Wadlow was hired to direct from a script written by Chris Roach and Jillian Jacobs. Let's talk about Truth or Dare, Jeff Wadlow, and Blumhouse for a minute, as it helps lay the foundation for things. Truth or Dare wasn't very good, but it was shot on a budget of $3.5 million and brought in $95 million worldwide. There are a handful of Truth or Dare connections going on here. Both were directed by Jeff Wadlow and written by Chris Roach and Jillian Jacobs. They had the same producers, James Moran and Ryan Turek, who were also behind the Happy Death Day movies and 2019's Ma, as well as the new trilogy of Halloween movies. Both were edited by Sean Albertson, who also cut Wadlow's True Memoirs of an International Assassin. Both were Blumhouse productions. They both shared the same costume designer, a Blumhouse vet having also worked on The Purge, Whiplash, and James Wan's upcoming Malignant. They were both PG-13 horror that were released on home video as unrated editions, calling themselves edgier cuts. And they both starred Pretty Little Liars' Lucy Hale. Weird. Wadlow had also previously directed the horror movie Cry Wolf and several episodes of FX's The Strain, and after Quentin Tarantino saw his latest effort, Kick-Ass 2, he named it one of 2013's best films. Wadlow had been set to direct Marvel's X-Force, but due to low box office returns, 20th Century Fox decided to go with Deadpool instead. Over the last few years, Blumhouse, primarily known for its consistent output of horror, has steadily been gaining critical success. Blumhouse's primary mission statement has been to produce horror films on a budget of $10 million or less, and make that back many, many times over in the theater. Blumhouse's efforts have excelled at engaging eyeballs looking for original thrills. In films like M. Night Shyamalan's Split and Leigh Whannell's Upgrade, Blumhouse is a name that carries a lot of weight. While not every film has found success, like 2016's The Darkness or Incarnate, which have been swept under the rug and largely forgotten altogether. Principal photography for the film began in January 2019 in Fiji, starring Ant-Man sidekick Michael Pena as Mr. Rourke, the enigmatic keeper of Fantasy Island.
Fantasies rarely play out as you or I might expect, but they always play out exactly as they should.
From the Divergent film series, and one of the bad guys in the underappreciated Live Free or Die Hard, Maggie Q as Gwen Olsen, a businesswoman who visits the island to realize her fantasy of accepting a marriage proposal. From Scream 4 and Truth or Dare, Lucy Hale as Melanie Cole, who visits the island to realize her fantasy of taking revenge on a childhood bully.
Toilet water. Yes, very 8th grade dance.
From Whiplash and Hulu's Catch-22, Austin Stowell as Patrick Sullivan, a former police officer who visits the island to realize his fantasy of enlisting in war in honor of his late father. From HBO's Silicon Valley, Jimmy O. Yang as Brax Weaver, who visits the island to realize his fantasy of having it all. You know his face from countless movies. He's Henry from Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer. Michael Rooker as Damon, a private investigator sent to investigate the true intentions of Fantasy Island.
Unless your fantasy is to die, you better come with me.
And from Sons of Anarchy, Resident Evil Afterlife, the guy who gets his nose shoved into his brain by Bruce Willis, and Kevin Costner's go-to guy, Kim Coates as Devilface, the leader of a drug cartel. At the time, this project was envisioned as to having a different approach to violence than what we see now. At the start of production, this was envisioned as being an R-rated movie, but by the time international distribution came around, things took on a bit of a different form. Most adults who visit a mysterious resort where their deepest desires can magically be met aren't going to think of things that are appropriate for 13-year-olds. That ultimately holds true with the film's script, as the characters we meet are interested in torturing childhood bullies and living hedonistic lifestyles. Anyway, this version of Fantasy Island's plot is: we're introduced to 5 passengers on a plane that are winners of a TV contest to realize their fantasies on a gorgeous island. That reminds me of 1994's Exit to Eden. Woof, Rosie O'Donnell in S&M gear.
This ain't your fantasy, asshole.
The island's facilitator and benefactor, Mr. Rourke, in his signature all-white suit. Each of the characters filled out a questionnaire, which allows Rourke to tailor each fantasy down to the last detail. Lucy Hale's character is there to exact revenge for being bullied in high school. Maggie Q's character is there to live out the fantasy of having a family and second chances. For Hale's segment, Saul was the main source of inspiration. Maggie Q's story has more of a butterfly effect type thing going on. The Hanson and Yang story starts out almost like Weekend at Bernie's, but turns into a home invasion thriller like The First Purge. The mystical island makes everyone's memories from the real world hazy, and as it turns out, their separate fantasies aren't actually separate. They're all connected. But how? There are a lot of storylines to juggle over the course of 109 minutes, which means we never get that much time to spend with any one character. It's hard to become too emotionally invested in their fates. All the guest fantasies start overlapping each other, and of course, turn for the worse.
No, what are you doing in our fantasy?
You're in mine.
Eventually, they begin to realize they're all intertwined, and someone's pulling the strings.
This place ain't what you think it is. People die here.
I won't spoil it, but it's dumb as fuck. I will, however, spoil the pre-credit stinger. This version does away with the best-known character, Tattoo, played by Hervé Villachez, but he eventually shows up in the form of Brax, who also sneaks in the famous Villachez plane line.
The plane! The plane!
Brax winds up staying behind on the island with Rourke as his new assistant. He will from now on be called Tattoo, and he even has the tattoo to prove it. Fantasy Island was released in the United States on Valentine's Day 2020 by Sony Pictures. It was critically panned, but the movie actually made money, churning out a profit of $48 million from a $7 million budget. One big factor I believe working against Fantasy Island is its PG-13 rating, which is true of basically every horror movie. While a PG-13 rating doesn't necessarily mean a movie has to be bad, it does, however, limit the amount of content that can be in it, which isn't necessarily a good thing. But since each guest is there to live out a fantasy, statistically speaking, you would think there would be certain levels of violence, gore, and sexual activity going on. And now, half-baked horror. Michael Rooker gives a pointless sacrifice. A ridiculous Saw-like torture device done poorly. Shameless Friday the 13th homage. Dr. Torture? What the fuck? Absolutely awful. And now, my last 3 thoughts. What were the fantasies of Rourke's staff? Do the dreams of those that died there power the island? Nicolas Cage was originally Jason Blum's first choice for Rourke, but Cage passed on the role. It's too bad because Nicolas Cage would have been great, and I think he would have brought some much-needed anarchy to the atmosphere. The raw material and basic premise hold promise, but perhaps it would have worked better as an event series where there would have been more time to flesh things out and give it a more satisfying whole. Thanks for watching Worst Movies and Cult Choice. I'm Kilgore Rosewater. We'll see you next time.